The US and the Soviet Union, one of the most bitter rivals in recent history. But these tensions were put aside in 1959 for a period of around 2 weeks, when an unlikely guest was welcomed into the USA. Hello everyone, and this is Yesterday Today. And today, 63 years ago, on September 15th of 1959, leader of the Soviet Union, predecessor to modern-day Russian, Mikhail Krushev, stepped foot in the USA for the first time at Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. at around 1 p.m. on a Tuesday, starting a 12-day tour of the USA. And this was unprecedented at the time, as the USA and the Soviet Union were engaged in something called the Cold War, which was not really a war but rather a rivalry between the two world powers about the system of communism and capitalism. And before his visit, neither the leader of the Soviet Union or the USA had visited each other's countries before, making his visit a first. Well anyways, Khrushchev wanted to visit the USA to help ease tensions between these two sides and get an understanding of the country and what it offers. As mentioned before, Khrushchev started his trip in Washington, D.C. when he landed there on a Tuesday afternoon along with his entourage and his family. Then he boarded a train to New York on Thursday. Then he flew to Los Angeles on Saturday, and then took a train up to San Francisco the next day, then took a train to Des Moines, Iowa on Tuesday, and then took an airplane to Pittsburgh at around midnight on Thursday, and then returned back to Washington, D.C. and to Camp David later in the day, where he stayed for the rest of his trip until Sunday evening, when he went back to the Soviet Union. And throughout his trip of the USA, there were some notable things that happened, such as his visit to an agricultural experiment station in Washington, D.C., where he is said to have complained about how the turkeys were too small and the pigs were too fat, his tour of New York City, where he commented, "If you've seen one skyscraper, you've seen them all," in regards to the Empire State Building, his lunch hosted by 20th Century Fox in Los Angeles, which featured many stars of the time such as Marilyn Monroe and Frank Sinatra. And during this lunch, Khrushchev would find out he was not visiting Disneyland due to security reasons, which made him quite displeased and go on a rant during the lunch about the cancellation. His viewing of the filming of a scene, the musical Can-Can, after the lunch just mentioned, where he would disapprove of the indecent clothing used in the dance scene. His tour of an IBM, the computer company, facility in San Francisco, where he is said to have been more impressed with the efficiency of the lunchroom rather than the computers. His visit to a meatpacking facility in Iowa, where he ate his first hot dog and stated, "We have beaten you to the moon, but you have beaten us in sausage making." And his visit to Pittsburgh, where he was handed a ceremonial key to the city by its mayor, Thomas Gallagher. And there are several more interesting things that occurred during this trip that I simply do not have time to cover. As mentioned earlier, the main goal of the trip was for Khrushchev and President Eisenhower to negotiate about certain global issues, and also for both sides to understand each other a bit better. And the first goal was not really achieved as no major agreements or policies were made between the two men, but the latter was achieved with both leaders understanding each other and their respective cultures more on a personal level. And this helped in lowering tensions between the two sides in the meantime. After the trip was concluded, it was planned that President Eisenhower would make a similar trip to the Soviet Union, but plans were never really developed, and the nail in the coffin came a year later when the U-2 incident occurred, raising tensions between both sides once again. So that is it for a unique event that happened during the Cold War on this day, so I hope that you all have a phenomenal day, and goodbye.